Okay. Good morning or evening, friends, wherever you are. As you can see, we are joined here now, staying for a time, is Bhante Pamuto. So we've multiplied here at the Buddhist family of New York, Vihara. So today's topic is the topic of metta. Right? I think it's a good topic, a good time to bring up this topic, because last week's topic was the mind. Right? So we talked about last week about the mind of greed, hatred, and delusion. Right? And so this week we're dealing with the antidote to hatred, which is metta. So the Pali word metta is often translated, or most commonly translated, as loving kindness. Well, that's a very old translation, and it's not really the best translation, but it is the most common. My preceptor, Bhante Gunaratana, who I ordained and lived with, he translates it as loving friendliness, which is a bit closer to the mark. It's a bit more of an accurate translation. But he just came out with a new book last year called Loving Metta in Plain English. Right? And he wanted to name it Loving Friendliness in Plain English, but Wisdom Publication says, no, everybody knows it as loving kindness, so that's what it's going to be called. So loving kindness is the most common translation. But if you look it up, if you look up the word metta in the Pali dictionary, really what it means is friendliness. Right? There's debate as to the roots of where this word metta comes from. Some say it comes from the word mitta or mitra in the Sanskrit, which means friend, friendliness, amity, right? And then some say actually it comes from the root mid, which is where love comes from, or to grow fat. So if you really wanted to, you could translate metta as growing fat with friendliness. What's growing fat? Your mind. Right? Developing goodwill in our mind. That is the purpose of metta. That's what we do when we practice metta. Right? My personal favorite translation is the least technically accurate, but to me encapsulates what the Buddha is talking about when he talks about metta. And that's the translation by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, Ajahn Jeff. He translates it as limitless goodwill. Right? That we develop goodwill for all beings everywhere, without exception. Right? Normally, we like these people, we don't like these people. We feel indifferent about those people. Right? But when we practice metta, and we develop a mind of metta, we try to bring all beings into the same level of equanimous goodwill, right? That we wish all beings to be happy, healthy, and well, right? So this is what we do when we practice metta. One of my favorite ways to share with people what the core of metta is actually not even a Buddhist thing. There's a quote from, I think he was English, either English or an American poet from the late 1800s. Edward Markham is his name. And he made this poem, and it goes like this. They drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took them in. That is metta, right? So our normal tendency is that we have likes and dislikes, right? We talked about this last week. You like people, you don't like people. The people you like, it's very easy to have compassion for. It's very easy to have good feelings for. Right? The people you don't like for whatever reason, different religion, different political party, different football team, whatever it is, right? Then it's much harder to have compassion and metta for those people, right? Because that's how our mind works. Our mind works that we have people we like and people we don't like. And so metta actually allows us to break through that, what they call in science they call it us versus them, or group preference, right? We like certain groups, we don't like other groups. There's groups that are us, then there's groups that are them, right? In-group preference is called. So this is what we're working with, right? We have a mind that has lots of aversion, lots of ill will, lots of anger and agitation. And this mind continues on. And what does it do? It causes us suffering in our mind. Because like, remember I said last week, a mind, you can tell when you're a meditator and you practice, you can tell a mind that's full of anger and aversion is just like the cartwheel that follows the foot of the ox, right? Very heavy, oppressive mind. Whereas the mind that's full of metta, right, is the mind like the shadow follows you without departing. Right? So light, so peaceful, so wonderful. Right? Metta is part of what they call, what the Buddha calls the Brahma Viharas. Right? There's metta, karuna, which is compassion, mudita, which is appreciative joy, or being appreciative of the happiness of others, and upekkha, which is equanimity. Brahma, as we know, is the highest heavenly realm, right? Where the Creator God Brahma dwells, the highest beings. And so vihara means to dwell. So the Buddha is saying that if you have a mind of metta, then your mind is as if it's in heaven. Is as if it is with the Brahmas. So this is why the Buddha wants us to practice metta. To directly counteract the mind of ill will. Directly counteract the mind of unfriendliness. Because that's in our mind. We have that greed, hatred, and delusion. And so when we practice metta, this is why metta is so important, right? Well, as I said last week or 2 weeks before, greed, hatred, and delusion, the Buddha says the definition of nibbana, of becoming awakened, is the abandoning of greed, hatred, and delusion. And so metta is so powerful a practice that it directly goes against one of those three that keep us in this wheel of samsara. The Buddha tells us in, it might be the Dhammapada, I'm not exactly aware, but the Buddha says that greater than somebody who gives 500 barrels of dana for breakfast, 500 barrels of dana for lunch, and 500 barrels of dana for dinner is one who practices metta for the length of a finger snap. That's how powerful metta is. That's how important metta is. Why is that? Why would the Buddha say that just that much is so powerful at practicing metta? Because the Buddha is thinking about our future. Not just in this life, but in future lives. The Buddha, you don't see it too much in the suttas, but you see it in the monastic Vinaya, where the Buddha basically says, like, somebody did a bad deed, and the Buddha says, it would be better if you would have died horribly right then and there than to have done that deed, because it will cause more suffering in the future. Right? So the Buddha, when he encourages us to practice metta, encourages us to abandon that mind of ill will and hatred, he's doing it out of compassion for us so that we can, build a better future for ourselves. We can develop good karma that will lead to skillful rebirth, skillful vipaka, fruit. Right? So it's much better to try to work with and to counteract our ill will in our mind than to just let it go free, just to let it be. Right? There's a wonderful ancient story that's in the Udana, It's called the anger-eating demon. If you've heard Ajahn Brahm, he tells this story. The first time I ever heard the story was from him like 10 years ago when I was, 12 years ago when I was first starting to listen. And so in this story, the Buddha tells the story of this yaka, this demon that comes to the throne room of Sakka. Sakka is the king of the Devas. And so the king, this Deva of this yaka goes and sits right on Sakka's throne. Okay? And all of the attendants and all the Devas around got really flustered. They were, I can't believe that this yaka would come out, come and sit on our Lord's throne, all this stuff. And they started being mean to him. They started cursing at him, go away, ugly yaka, all these kind of things. Okay? And every time that the yaka, that they threw insults and negativity and ill will towards this yaka, guess what happened? The yaka got more handsome, more comely, more good looking, more radiant. Right? And obviously you can imagine that probably didn't make the Devas feel any better about it. They're like, what is going on? But then Sakka comes back. And Sakka, instead of being angry and being agitated, because remember, Sakka, king of the Devas, was a disciple of the Buddha. He was a practitioner. And he was a very wise practitioner. And so he came back, and all he had to do was, in kindness to this yaka, he just announced his name. And as he announced his name, declared his skillfulness, right? Declared his goodness. Then this yaka got uglier and uglier and uglier until it disappeared, right? So in the more traditional version, in like the version Ajahn Brahm tells about, actually they tell it in the reverse. They tell it that the more anger you gave to them, the bigger and meaner and uglier the beast came. But if you read the sutta version, it's how I told you. And it took me a while to, it actually took me a couple years to understand this. And when I thought about another sutta, then I understood it. There's a sutta where the Buddha tells, the Buddha is asked, this is in the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha is asked by, was it Devas or Brahmins? I don't remember. But he's asked, is there anything, I think it was Brahmins, is there anything that the Buddhas, the Tathagatas, approve of killing? And the Buddha says, yes, there is one thing that the Tathagatas approve of killing. And you're like, oh boy, the Buddhas approve of killing something, right? But then you read on, and the Buddha says that the awakened ones approve of the killing of anger with its honeyed crest and poison root. Then I understood the simile of the anger-eating demon. Right? Honeyed crest, thinking about a plant, right? The crest, the flower of the plant, very smells nice, maybe it tastes, put in teas, and it's very honeyed, very sweet tasting. But at the root, it's poisonous. Right? And that is what anger is. Right? We can get angry and we feel powerful. We feel righteous. We feel justified. And no matter how right we actually might be, because sometimes you are right to be angry, sometimes you're not. But no matter how right you feel like you are and how you might be, guess what? There's still poison there. Right? So this anger-eating demon, it fed on the anger, and it got more sweet, more good looking, more this, more that, right? So we understand this is the nature of our anger. The Buddha does, right? People ask, does the Buddha give any justification for anger? Any justification for killing? Any justification for anything like this? And the answer in the old text is no, he doesn't. Right? There's no, now of course we might get angry, right? This is the important thing. We're not trying to repress our anger, right? In any of our Buddhist practice, we're not trying to repress anything. But we practice metta to counteract that. It's very important. So we think about, how do we practice metta? Without doing some kind of a guided meditation, I can give you just tips that you can apply right now. Wherever you're out and about, when you see people, you can wave. You can say hello with a smile. Now obviously it's COVID time. We all have masks, so it's hard to, to do that. But even still, like when I go for my walk every day, I like to wave to people. And even if there's no external thing, in my mind, I can wish, may they be well, happy, and peaceful. Right? You can go around to wherever you're doing, whoever you're with, you can wish them in your mind, may they be well, happy, and peaceful. Okay? The purpose, when we practice metta, the purpose is to develop a feeling of goodwill in your mind. That you have no enemies. That all beings are friends. Now that doesn't mean, that there are beings that won't like you or will still try to harm you, right? That will always be true. So it's not about being a pushover, right? It's not about just letting people do whatever they want with you, but it's about having in your mind that I have no ill will towards this person. That's the power of metta. And of course, the important thing to understand about metta is that just like any of the other meditations and the contemplations, it's something you develop. It's a habit. It's a practice. At first, you practice, may all beings be happy, except for that person. I don't like that person. Oh, may all beings be well, except for that person, right? Your mind is always going to have people that it's going to go, oh, don't give any metta to that person, or that type of people, or those people, or that people, right? Your mind's going to be that way. That's normal, right? But you practice over and over again, right? Even when you are maybe in your house, right? One easy way to do it, this is how the most common way to practice metta, this is how the Buddha says, one abides pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind of metta. First quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, so all around. So above, below, and all around, one abides pervading limitless goodwill, metta, to all beings, abundant, limitless, exalted, without hatred or enmity. Right? So whenever you're somewhere in your house or whatever, you can practice this exalted metta, right? You can spread, like how I teach and what I like to practice is how there's a sphere of metta around me, right? And I visualize that going bigger. Like, so it would be all beings in this building, all beings in this city, town, country, Earth, the galaxy, the universe, etc. So you're expanding, just like that little poem that I said in the beginning, draw a circle, right? All kinds of people will draw a circle, draw you out of it. They don't want to have anything to do with you, they'll hate you, whatever. But a practitioner of the Dhamma, a person who practices metta, draws all beings in their circle. Right? Even out to all beings, you could start from all beings in this building, right? There might be, humans in the building, but there might be bugs and mice and all kinds of little creatures you can't even see. Or maybe even devas, maybe even yakas, who knows? There are all kinds of beings, right? And so whenever we practice, we want it to be appamada, which is limitless. No barriers. When we practice metta, race doesn't matter, sex doesn't matter, political affiliation, what country you're from, what you like, what you dislike. None of that matters when we practice metta. Metta breaks through barriers, right? Because there's all kinds of ill will in our mind, in all the nooks and crannies of our mind. Right? And when we practice metta, the purpose of metta is to eradicate those nooks and crannies of ill will. Right? To replace ill will with goodwill. And it takes work. And it's not easy. But the benefits are out of this world. The benefits are Brahmarific. They're from the Brahma realm, the heaven realm. Right? The Buddha gives us 11 benefits of practicing metta. Now let's see if I can remember all 11 of these. So, 1 goes to sleep well, 1 wakes up well, 1 has no evil dreams. Okay? So this means that when you practice goodwill towards all beings, you're less likely to be harmful towards them, you're less likely to have regrets and remorse. So it's very easy to fall asleep. You have good sila, good morality, very easy to fall asleep. No evil dreams, no worries about people who are going to get back at you or anything like that. Right? And you wake up, very nice. So, goes to bed well, wakes up well, sees no evil dreams. What's the word? Humans and non-humans like you, right? They want to be around you, right? This is where you hear about like the devas protect like practitioners, right? Those who practice metta, these kind of things, the devas protect them, right? But these beings, because you're because you emanate metta. Have you ever been around somebody like that? I've been around that. I experienced that once, where I came to this monk, and it was like I entered this sphere, and inside that sphere, I felt no judgment. Like this monk would not judge me. Right? That this monk just had complete goodwill towards me. Right? It was really something that I felt. It was an amazing experience. Right? So metta can do this. Right? Beings feel this. They understand this. And so you become dear. That's the translation they use. Dear to human beings and dear to non-human beings. Okay? When I experienced this a little bit when I was doing my work as a layperson, when I was doing child protective services, and I became a Buddhist and I started practicing lots of metta. Metta was a big thing for me in my years as a layperson. I loved metta. I was powerful with metta, right? And I started to notice when I would go to people's houses for the first time, they never met me. And then, guess what? Their dogs and their little children, little babies, they would just come right up to me. Right? Some would hug me, or the dogs would lick me or whatever. And the parents would say, that's weird. My child or my dog, they don't go up to strangers like that. And I just chalked it up, but it kept happening. And I thought, maybe it's the metta, right? Children and dogs, they have these kind of senses about people that as we become adults, we lose, right? So there is something to this metta thing, right? The Buddha tells us this, right? When you practice lots of metta, you become dear, right? To all beings. The devas protect you, right? And then the next one, fire, poison, and sword cannot harm you. Now, modern monastics don't take this literally. Right? Like my preceptor Bhante Gunaratane, he'll say that this means greed, hatred, and delusion. Right? So when you have a mind of metta, and this is true, when you have a mind full of metta, greed, hatred, and delusion are not there. Right? It's just like a mind full of letting go. Right? A mind full of metta, a mind full of non-harming. Of course, greed, hatred, and delusion won't be there. But how I like to do this, how I like to say this is, it definitely shouldn't be taken literal. Like obviously you're not going to be Superman. All of a sudden somebody tries to hit you with a sword or shoot you with a bullet and it just bounces off. That's not what this means. To me, what this means is that because you are so dear to so many beings, and because you are not harming beings, there's less likelihood that they will want to harm you. I think that this is what this means. Right? Doesn't mean you become invincible. It just means that it won't, have less likelihood to be harmed by beings because you are held so dear. Even for most of the most, I don't want to say evil, but people who do really bad things, there are certain people that even they won't harm. Right now, there are certain like psychopathic people and stuff that doesn't matter, but even people who do really bad things like monks or holy people, they won't even harm them. Right? And that's this because even somebody who is mired in greed, hatred, and delusion can notice a being like this. Right? So that's where, in my perspective, this is where I understand this to be. Right? And then your complexion is serene. So meaning that because you're always smiling, you're always happy, you're shiny, your complexion is serene. Right? You die not confused in mind. Your mind is clear, bright, happy. Right? And if you don't become awakened in this very life, then you are born where? With Brahma. You're born in the highest heavenly realms from practicing Metta. Right? So it's a win-win to practice Metta. If you haven't practiced Metta yet, I highly suggest you start practicing Metta. And I gave you a very simple technique. It can get more complicated, and there can be all kinds of guided meditations. There's tons and tons of guided meditations. But the technique that I told you briefly is the one that I often teach the most because it's the one that it's simple, practical, you can do it anywhere, doesn't require a lot of verbiage in your mind, and for me, is most impactful, right? So to remember, to think about, you can visualize whatever beings in your house, your town, country, planet, galaxy, whatever. You can visualize, visualize your sphere of Metta growing, encapsulating all beings without exception in those areas. And you can say words like, may all beings in this house be well, happy, and peaceful. It doesn't have to be a big production, right? And so as you're doing that, what you're trying to do is develop a mind free of ill will. And you'll notice when your mind becomes clear, calm, bright, and happy, right? And also warm-hearted feelings of friendliness, of friendship for all beings. For me, I grew up with a big Italian family, and when I think of having Metta for all beings, I think about growing up, being around the table with 15, 20 people and feeling so safe and peaceful and happy, right? And so for me, when I practice Metta, I try to extend that table out, right? Invite all beings to my table. Now, not everybody maybe had good families, but almost everybody has friends and people who they consider family, right? So it's like a feeling of all your close friends and family together with you in this safe, secure, peaceful, happy situation, right? And you extend that out to all beings. May all beings, you have no corner of your mind, at least for a short time, that has any ill will towards any being. That's so wonderful, so powerful. It's such a experience that you want to abide in it continuously, right? And then of course something happens, somebody cuts you off at work, or somebody makes a comment that you don't like, on your Facebook or whatever, and then the anger and the agitation and all of that comes back. And that's okay, that's normal. But then you can remember, It was so much nicer when my mind was full of metta. It was so much nicer, so much more peaceful. I should practice metta. Right? There's lots of places, again, COVID changes things a little bit, but when you're out and about, there's lots of experiences, like you're stuck in traffic, stuck on a line. Like I saw for the first time, actually I was with Sunny, and I saw a line of people waiting to get into a store. I thought this was to get a shop, but no, this was with people that lined to get to shop. And because I had not been anywhere near a store since, like last December. So it was surprising. I'm like, okay, well, that's an opportunity, right? If you're waiting at the supermarket, right, to get in, that's an opportunity to practice metta. So many beings around you, so many people, in a time where there's lots of anxiety, lots of fear. Who might have this? Who might have that? Right? And our natural tendency is to push people away, right? And maybe physically we have to do that, right? Physically we have to have social distance, we have to have masks and all these things. But mentally, we can be close. Mentally, we can have kindness and goodwill for all beings. Mentally, we can have all beings at our table, all beings in our circle, and be close to all beings. Right? So this is the power of metta, the importance of metta. Right? And maybe maybe you've heard the traditional Karaniya Metta Sutta. You've heard monks chant that, maybe you've chanted that. There's a wonderful story that goes, a commentarial story that goes with this sutta. Right? And it starts out with these monks, they're in the forest, and they're practicing. And when the monks first came to the forest, all the devas that live in the trees and stuff, all the beings, they were really happy that the monks were there. But then over time, you know how it is. They say, if you have guests, over time it gets a little, okay, when are you gonna go? Right? So these beings, like I think one of them, they said one of the monks kept blocking the entrance to one of the trees and all these kind of things. So these devas got kind of agitated. And they're like, okay, we need to make these monks go away, right? So they conjured up all kinds of like floating heads and headless walking corpses like zombies and things. And it scared the monks, and they ran away, and they went to the Buddha. And the Buddha says, go back and practice this metta. And he gave the Karaniya Metta Sutta. And so they went back and they practiced metta, and they lived in harmony with all the beings in the forest, even the ones they couldn't see, the devas. Right? And so then they weren't, there's no more floating heads and corpseless bodies chasing after them, because there was all in peace. Right? So this is the power of metta. This is what we do. We practice metta to go against our ill will and agitation. And one important thing to understand is actually it's not really good to practice what my preceptor Bhante G, he'll say, when somebody's coming at you with a baseball bat, you don't practice metta. Meaning that it's hard to practice metta when you're in the middle of anger, right? When you're in the middle of a situation, very hard to practice metta. Like in your mind, may they be well, happy, and peaceful. Right? Metta is for when you're not in an angry situation, right? If you have lots of agitation towards a person, practice metta when you're away from that person, right? Give them, in your mind, lots of goodwill. May they be well, happy, and peaceful, right? And then when you encounter them, your mind will be more forgiving of them. Your mind will give them more chances. Like, okay, you still might be on guard. Okay, what are they going to do? But you have goodwill towards them. You're starting that encounter with a basis of goodwill. And usually that makes things go a lot better, right? Because usually somebody says something, then you get agitated, and then you respond, and then they respond back. And it's like a game of tennis, an escalation of, bouncing the anger and the hatred back and forth until it gets more and more and more, and then it gets out of control. Right? So we practice metta so that when we are in situations, we can have goodwill towards people. We can have goodwill towards beings. Right? we can also, very important, and my last thing that I'll say before we go to Q&A, is to practice metta for ourselves. Right, the Buddha tells the story of it's the sutta. It was the king and the queen, and it's set up as this like romantic thing. And the king, I don't know if it was Bimbasara or Pasenadi, but he said to his queen, "Who do you hold most dear in the world?" And of course, this is like if it's a modern romance, it's like, "You, I hold you most dear." But this queen was a practitioner of the Dhamma. She was very skilled. She said, "Myself. I hold myself as most dear in the world." And then the king says, "Oh yeah, I guess so. Yeah, me too." Right? And so they go to the Buddha and they tell this, and the Buddha says, this is correct. Search long and far, and you will not find one person who does not hold themselves more dear than anybody else. All right? So because of this, it really behooves us to practice lots of metta for ourselves. Right? When I did the introduction to meditation 2 times ago, right, I talked about having lots of self-compassion, right? For when you get angry or you don't do it right or whatever, having lots of compassion and kindness for yourself, right? Same thing with metta. Because if you don't have lots of metta for yourself, how are you going to give it to other beings? Right? I was this way. Like before I started meditating, I was really agitated and I hated people, right? And I didn't like people. And I thought, oh, people are fools and sheep and all this stuff. And mostly that was because I really hated myself. Because I was more critical and more judgmental of myself than I was of other people. And I didn't like people, right? But I practiced metta. Like I said, I found Ajahn Brahm, right? That was a wonderful help for me, right? To practice lots of self-compassion, self-kindness, self-metta. And as I did that, and as I practiced the Dhamma, and I practiced meditation, I started to let that go. And I practiced lots of metta. And I let that go. And I said, okay, so you're a patujana, right? Talking to myself. So you're not awakened. You're a screw up. It's okay, right? Keep practicing, right? Have lots of metta for yourself, right? And so once I started to develop lots of metta for myself, it was so easy to have metta for others, right? Oh, okay, if I'm a screw up, of course they're going to screw up. They're going to mess up too, right? Just like me. I have lots of metta. It's okay, right? So you develop this wonderful mind of metta. And it's so freeing. Because it's very oppressive to have a mind where you're always angry all the time. Maybe you are that, or maybe you've known people that way, who are always negative and angry. And just being around them, it's like the opposite of being around somebody with metta. Right? Being around them is just like, it feels like your energy is being sapped. You're just like, oh, it's so exhausting to be around this, right? It's so exhausting to have that in your mind. It's much more peaceful, much more wonderful, much more conducive to your happiness and the happiness of others to practice lots of metta. Every day, even if it's just for the finger snap, practice metta. And not only metta is not something that you just repeat and do with your mind, but you practice metta in your actions too. Like opening doors for people, saying hello to people, doing good things for people. Right? That is also practicing metta. Right? That's metta. There's metta, goodwill, friendliness through your thoughts, your words, and your deeds. All of those. And metta will help us get to awakening, will help us continuously go against our ill will. And if it doesn't help us get to awakening, at least we hang out with Brahma, which is a pretty good consolation prize. Not the best, but it's better than many other places to be reborn in. So with that, friends, I hope I've encouraged you to start to develop some kind of metta practice, even if it's a small one in your life. And as you practice it, then you'll start to see the benefits, and you'll always want to dwell with Brahma, always want to be within the Brahma Viharas. So we'll open it to questions now.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bande. Thank you so much for the talk this morning. It's very very wonderful. All right, we're gonna open the forum for Q&A, and like usual, please, if you want to ask directly, click on the raise hands feature on the bottom right corner of your device. Let me see if there's. Oh yes, Sarita, go ahead. Hold on one second. Let me just unmute.
Okay. Namo Buddhaya, Bante.
Hello, Harita.
Bante, when you mentioned about the story about King Pasidani and Queen Malika,
Yes, that's it.
I'm really wondering whether they had children. If they had children, how could she say I love myself the most, not the children? Because if I were asked like that, I would say I love my children over everything.
Mm-hmm.
So now my question, how could she answer that whether they don't have children?
Ah, that is a very good question, isn't it?
Thank you.
I am assuming, well, I don't know, usually the kings had multiple wives and lots of children, so assuming that they had children together, right? Maybe this was when they were older, I don't know, and it feels different, but really what the Buddha is talking about is something that goes very deep, right? The Buddha is talking about this kind of, this love and desire for self and holding one so dear that actually keeps us going from life to life, right? It's like whatever beings that we're connected with in this life, our spouses and our children, etc., we hold them very dear. We obviously, parents will die for their children, things like this, right? But even still, we hold this self, we hold ourselves so much dearer because of our craving, because of our desire, right? And so we want to what? We want to continue experiencing pleasant things, and we want to continue having life to life to life, right? So I think this is where the Buddha is going. It's a much more refined aspect that the Buddha is talking about here, above and beyond just the typical love of a parent to a child. Like that's the best answer I could give for that.
Yeah.
It is something it's something that's going deeper than the normal, and I think it's much more meaning towards the identity view, the self that you hold dear. I think that's where it's going.
Yeah, because we just exactly discussed the same story last evening. I protest. I said, no, I would say I love my children over everything. And then nobody knows whether the king and the queen, they had children or not. And then, but what is the point? Another question, Bante. Can we also send metta in our meditation to those who already passed away? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Now, it's one of those things where you don't know where they are. You don't know what they're doing. You don't know what being that they've become. But you wish that they are well, happy, and peaceful. You wish that that they attain nibbana, that they attain freedom from suffering, right? So you just have that goodwill towards that person, and you say, may they end their samsaric journey, right? May they attain nibbana, right? May they, and until then, may they, have good, good rebirths that allow them to hear and practice the Dhamma well, right? So you can have thoughts like that towards that person.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarita. Thank you, Bande. We're still gonna wait. By the way, we also open on YouTube. So if anybody who listen from YouTube wanna ask questions, you can also type your questions on the comment box. Next question will be Carl. Hey, Carl. Good morning, Carl. Let's go ahead, unmute yourself, Carl.
Hey, Carl.
Good morning. Well, first of all, one comment on the woman who just asked your question. I was brought up to believe that if you don't love yourself, it's not possible to love other people. It's just a thought as she was talking about loving her children. Obviously, yes, you love your children, but you have to learn to love yourself first. But I have a question for you. Earlier, you started to mention the word evil, and then you said you didn't want to use the word evil. I believe that there is evil in the world, and I just wonder, how can you practice Metta to somebody with like Mao Zedong or Adolf Hitler?
Actually, you know, that's a very good question, because I use that all the time. So the reason the Pali word is papa, and that means evil, but the reason I don't like to use the word evil, because in the Western context, in the Judeo-Christian context, you know, good and evil is kind of like force, like it's, you know, the like eternal evil, eternal good. But in Buddhism, you know, evil is just like, you know, actions, really bad actions that a person can do, right? So like a person is not wholly good or wholly evil, right? So that's the main reason why I tend to stay away from evil person, right? And you bring up a good point. So like when I teach Metta, when I do Metta retreats, one of the things that I bring up to people is, could you have Metta for Hitler? Right? And you see people's eyes bulge. They're like, what? How could this happen? Right? And the reason I do this is for that. It's to give them a shock to the system. And this is because within the Buddhist context, all of us in our previous lives have been Hitler, and all of us have been Mother Teresa, or choose your personification of complete goodness, whatever, right? So we've all done really bad things, and we've all done really horrible things, right? In our previous lives, and even in this life, you know, maybe not all of us have killed lots of people and done like really bad things in this life, but we have the capability to do it, right? With our choices, with our karma and everything. There's lots of conditions, but this helps us to understand, right, that we're all kind of stuck in this. We're siblings in samsara, siblings in suffering. We're all stuck in this hellhole together, right? And so even somebody like Hitler, even somebody like Stalin, right? You know, whoever, Genghis Khan, people who have killed ungodly millions upon millions of people, who've done really horrible things. We can still have metta for them. We can still wish that they attain nibbana, right? We can still hope that they are born in having good rebirths, so that they can hear the Dhamma, right? And practice the Dhamma. Right? Now, this is an important thing to understand, that you can have metta for somebody and not condone. And this is something that a lot of people confuse these days, especially. You can have metta for somebody and still not condone their actions, right? You can know that somebody did really bad stuff and probably needs to be in jail for the rest of their lives. But you don't have to have ill will towards them in your mind. You can have metta towards them. That you can say, you know, this person has done really bad stuff. You know, they're going to suffer for that. They're the consequences of their actions in next life or whatever. You know, but you hope and you wish. You know, you give them that metta, that they do well, they are born in good births, and that they eventually attain freedom from suffering. Right? So no matter what a person does, this is you see the story of Angulimala, the Buddhist serial killer, right? There's always redemption, right? A serial killer who becomes a Buddhist monk and then becomes an awakened being, all in one life, right? Now, of course, he had lots of previous, like all of us, he had previous karma, previous actions, good and bad, that affected things. But it just goes to show you that even somebody like Angulimala could have a redemption arc and can become awakened. Right? So we'd never want to take a person's actions as the totality of who they are. And that's why I try to avoid saying like evil people, an evil person, right? Yeah, have they done lots of evil stuff, lots of bad stuff? Yeah. Are they going to suffer for it? Yeah. But it doesn't help me in my mind to have lots of anger and agitation towards them. So I want to have goodwill towards all beings. Right? Because there's no, it's so, the more you see it, when you understand it, it's just so stupid to not have it. Like, why am I, obviously if they harm me, it's a lot harder, right? If somebody harms you directly, it's a lot harder to have metta for them. But otherwise, to have goodwill, right? Because not to have even a tiny bit of ill will towards any person anywhere is a good goal to have.
This is going to require a lot of work on my part.
On all of ours parts. And probably many lifetimes too. Don't worry about it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Bante. Bante, there's a questions from the text box here from Rudy. My father is always easily angry to my mom and us, the children. How do we forgive him while he always being angry again and cannot change?
So these are tough situations, right? One of the most important things that you need to do is to set barriers and protect yourself, right? Just because we have metta for somebody, just because we're Buddhist practitioners, doesn't mean we allow them to abuse us, right? That doesn't mean that we lash out back at them with anger and unskillful ways, right? But we don't need to just take any abuse from anybody, right? There are certain things you might have to do. I can't give you specific advice in your specific situation, but to understand that to protect yourself, to set boundaries, and for the family to act as a united front. Not in opposition to your father, not to like say, we're all against you, but to say as a united front that says, no, we don't accept your anger anymore and how you treat us, right? We love you, but we don't accept this, and we won't. You can't walk all over us anymore. You can't use us as, because you're angry because of work or whatever in the world, right? And that's what happens. Like, people get, have stuff happen to them in the world, and they have situations and they get angry, and usually the people who they take it out on are the people closest to them, their family and friends and loved ones, right? So acting as a united force with metta, with the good of that person in your mind, not as an adversarial thing, right? That is the only way that that person can maybe have the impetus, maybe get a little seed in their mind. Oh, okay, I need to change, right? My whole family is acting as one united force to say, listen, this, right? You can't force them to change, right? I even saw in my job as Child Protective Services, I saw the state of New Jersey, in the courts, saying by law, by court order, you have to change. And people didn't change. Right? That was really eye-opening to me. Right? There's no force on earth that can force somebody to change if they're not able, ready, and willing. to change. Okay? So all you can do is protect yourself, set your boundaries, and work together with your family to encourage this person to make sure that they know full awareness of what they're doing to you all, so that they understand their actions are having negative consequences to you. And so then you can, then they can start to investigate and understand the consequences of their actions, and then build up the desire to want to change. And then once they want to change, they can come, okay, can you help me change? And then we work as a family, work together as a unit to help things get better. And so that's my advice in that regard. But still, try to have metta. If you have anger and aversion that arises while you're doing these skillful things, like the advice that I gave you, practice metta for this person. There's causes and conditions, right? Whether in the past, in this life, from previous lives, right? That anger is just not coming out of nowhere, right? This anger, there's causes and conditions for all things. Everything arises and then ceases, right? So, but your father needs to understand these causes and conditions so that he can start to lessen his anger, or at least make sure that his anger is not unskillful towards you. Okay?
Thank you, Bante. Still waiting. I don't see any other raised hands here, or any comments or questions on the chat sections, Bante. So, Bante, you did mention quickly before in regards to meditations by using Metta as a object, or as a way of doing it. Now, when we, just like when we do anapanasati or breathing, observing the breath, it's always, going out and back again, out and back again. Are we doing the same thing too with Metta, Bante, when we do that meditations?
No, well, there's lots of different, different teachers will have different techniques for metta. But mostly when you're practicing metta, you're not doing a anapanasati. You're not doing a mindfulness of breathing. Oftentimes you'll start out with that and then go into metta. And there are some people who they don't practice mindfulness of breathing, they just practice metta. So metta is considered also what they call a samatha practice, meaning that it's a practice that develops peace and tranquility in the mind, just like mindfulness of breathing. So there's some people who just practice metta instead of mindfulness of breathing, right? And that practicing metta can get them into jhanas and things like that. They can go very deep with metta. So you can practice metta in that way, or you can practice metta in all of your activities as you're going around. But when you're practicing metta, it's a very in a traditionally like a sitting metta practice. Then that is where you're going into there's like specific words, specific visuals, etc. That are part of the practice that are distinct and different from satipatthana or anapanasati, etc. Now you can actually mix them all together, but for basic metta practice, it's something that is a very distinct, separate practice within itself. So I have a 5-part article series on metta, basically explaining most of what I talked about here and more, and giving how to practice different types of metta practice. And I can send that link to you, Sunny, and you can put it in the in the WhatsApp or wherever to share that around.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Bante.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. It's pretty much similar questions too. There's questions from the chat section from Ethan and Bridget Davis. How to practice metta meditation? So yeah. To read there's not too much time left, so then that is literally a retreat all to itself. Yep.
So not enough time to talk. I gave you a little bit of advice on how to do it in this earlier, but the best thing to do is to read the article.
Okay, so Ethan and Bridget, once this meeting's done, I'm gonna send that link that Bante is going to send me, and then I'll forward it to all the WhatsApp groups that we have. All right, thank you so much, Bante. I think it's about 2 minutes to 11. I think it's good time for us to close, and if you don't mind, to give some blessings and also blessing to the departed Tony Sugiono.
Tony, yeah. Sounds like one of my people.
Sorry, Teddy. Teddy Sugiono, Bante. Teddy.
What's that?
His name is Teddy.
Teddy, yeah. So when somebody has passed, traditionally in Buddhist culture, what the people who pass they do some kind of, like in the Catholic culture that I grew up in, they have a mass said for the person, right? Or they go and they light a candle, and that's pretty much the same in Buddhism, right? So what we like to do is, like in traditional Buddhist countries like Sri Lanka, they'll have a dana for the monastics within a couple weeks of the person's passing, and then after 3 months, and then once a year, they'll offer food to the monks, or they'll do some good deed in memory of that person, right? That's a very good practice for us to do, right? Whoever knew this person, we can, in their memory, do some kind of a good deed, right? And that will be a very joyful thing. And, right, the Buddha tells us that, that our departed ones, that they, depending on where they are in their new rebirth, they can share in that merit, right? That we do. We do a good thing, and we offer that to them, right? So, and we do that with our reflections on Metta. We reflect. May they be well, happy, and peaceful. May they have a good rebirth. May they eventually attain the sweet bliss of Nibbana. Right? And so this is what we should have thoughts about Teddy. Right? Whenever somebody passes, we should think, may they have a good rebirth. May that they can hear the Dhamma, that they can become awakened and end this cycle of samsara. How much more compassion and metta can you have for somebody than to wish that they end the cycle of samsara? That is the highest metta, the highest compassion. So we hope and wish that Teddy has a good rebirth, can hear the Dhamma, and end his samsaric journey, be free from suffering. And we can think of Teddy as we do our final chant. Dukkha patta chani dukkha, baya patta chani baya, soka patta chani soka, hontu sabbe pipaniyo, ettavata cha amehi, sampadang punya sampadang, sabbe deva anumodantu, sabba sampati siddhya. Akasata chabumata devanaga mahidika, punyang tang anumoditva charang rakantu sasanang. The first lines, dukkha pata chani dukkha. May the suffering be free from suffering. Baya pata chanibaya. May the fearful be free from fear. Soka pata chani soka. May those who are grieving shed their grief. Right? Those who have friends and close relatives to Teddy who died, going through our grieving, right? Going through our the experience of loss of somebody. Right? May they also find happiness, peace. May they also rejoice in their wonderful relationship that they had with Teddy, right? That they can think of, have good memories and good feelings of this person who's passed on, and that they and we all can wish that they end their suffering, right? And so too may all beings be. This very powerful lines of metta. All right? So friends, go forth, practice metta, have a good day. Keep Teddy in our minds. We wish he has a good rebirth and ends his suffering. Okay, friends.